All right, let's go ahead and get started on the overview of the nervous system. First off, here it is in all of its glorious beauty. You really have two divisions that you're really caring about. The central nervous system, which has your brain and spinal cord, with the peripheral nervous system holding on to everything else. The cranial nerves, spinal nerves, your gut nerves, as well as the things that sort of sense, hey, something's going on with my body. Now, really quick and easy way to remember how to divide these things off is to throw a nail at it. Okay, don't actually throw a nail at yourself, but hey, a nail, if you were to stick it right over, superimpose it over the entire body, you would see that the head looks very similar to that of the brain. Okay, not really, but it lays there. It's very nice, with the smooth, shiny part and the pointy part, all acting kind of similar to that of the spinal cord. So remember, spinal cord, brain, kind of look like a nail. Everything else that's branching off it is your peripheral nervous system. Now we can divide up in this wonderful, glorious thing that is your nervous system into three different parts: a sensory neuron, a central nervous system, and an efferent neuron or neurons. Let's go ahead and begin and look at the afferent portion, or your sensory division. Now you got two very generally lumped senses: your somatic senses and your special senses. Your somatic senses is, we're just going to make it really super duper simple right now, your skin senses. Now your special senses is this glorious, beautiful man or woman, whatever it is, right here, with its wonderful schnoz about the size of mine, and tongue, and eyeball, and ear. All of these receive input and they go, I wonder what this means. And they send it to the central nervous system. It helps remember that afferent, Latin or Spanish, the word letter A also means to or towards. So you are sending information to and towards the central nervous system. The central nervous system, or your thinky part, goes ahead and sends it to the efferent. After it's made a decision, it is making an effect. That effect decides what it's going to do. This one right here is your voluntary goodness, your somatic nervous system, your skeletal muscles. You have complete control over your skeletal muscles. Now, the part that you do not have control over is your autonomic nervous system. Autonomic, that sounds awfully familiar. If it's automated, I wonder what, oh yeah, automated, yes. It means that it just happens. Now, there's a couple of parts to your autonomic nervous system. There's two that we really care about: the fight or flight, also deemed the sympathetic, and the rest and digest, the parasympathetic. To help you remember parasympathetic versus sympathetic, let's go ahead and just break down the words. Para in Latin or Spanish again means for. So when you are resting and digesting, you are getting ready for the sympathetic response. The sympathetic response is, well, run, little man, run. You're going to lose. So with that remembrance, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system has some type of effect on your smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. Hey, that sounds awfully familiar. Reflection back / horror nightmares back from the muscle chapter. With the enteric nervous system also playing a role. Again, go ahead and tell your nervous you have no control over your digestive tract. You're going to gurgle and make all those weird noises in the middle of a very quiet area, and everyone's going to look at you and wonderfulness. So if we're to summarize it in words, sensory, yeah, every single neuron that can sense something, with the integrative being the thinky parts and how best to decide how to respond, and finally a motor, you respond. So after we've talked about that, let's go ahead and dive into the varying types of cells inside the nervous tissue. The number one being the most important is your neuron. Everyone that associates with the nervous tissue, they think, hey, this is nervous tissue right here. A neuron obviously is a cell. You got yourself a nucleus, you got yourself some mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, blah, blah, blah. wonderful remembrance of all that goodness. What makes it different are these guys right here and this lovely long thing right here. These guys right here, the dendrites, they are the things that are going to receive some type of input. They're the ones that are going to tell, hey, we should do something. We're sensing something. Or integration neurons sending some type of information to it saying, hey, it's time to do something stupid. Now what happens is another landmark that you have that is absolutely and essentially important is what I'm circling right here, your axon hillock. This is so super important. If you want to sit down here and memorize bits and pieces of the neuron, make certain you do not forget this portion. We'll talk about this importance here in the electroexcitability in the next video. Now this part right here is called the axon. This is where all that information, if it decides to say, I am going to go ahead and send a message, it's going to send a message down this axon and finally down to this axon terminal. Axon terminal is where this glorious, beautiful thing right here, showing off all this goodness, will actually send out the information to varying types of neurons that might be at this end of her. Now, these neurons can be broken down into structural and functional classification. Hopefully you're not having a little bit of PTSD going on here because that of the whole, oh goodness, joints. No, why? Okay, that was a little corny, but I enjoyed it. It only took me 30 minutes to develop that slide. Oh well. So there's the structural classification of neurons. You got 3 different types. Let's go ahead and break them apart really quick. You got the unipolar, and good old the count is going to help us out. We got one branch. Literally one branch. There's your cell body, and it branches off once. You got the dendrites up here, and the axon going down all the way. You got the bipolar. Two branch. You got the one branch dedicated to the dendrites, all sticking onto the cell body, and then another branch coming off for just axon. 1, 2 branches off the cell body. Good old, oh, poor count. Too many to count. Lots. So this is the neurons that are your thinky parts, or the motor, as well as the motor neurons. You got a whole bunch of dendrites with one axon. Multipass. Now you could have multiple different types of multi-bodies, goodness, wonderfulness. You got the Purkinje and the pyramidal. You do not need to know at this time where and how they operate and function. So functional classification of neurons, you got, oh, these words look familiar. Sensory afferent. We're probably going, oh yeah, I know what that is. That's the stuff that senses things. You got the interassociation motor neurons. That's the thinky parts. And then we got the motor efferent, the things that carry out an effect or make you move. And here's a picture of what they mean. There's your sensory receptor. That sensory receptor sends along to the central nervous system and to an interneuron, with an interneuron saying, okay, I've made my decision. Let's send it down an effector or motor neuron. Now, if we were to break it down or stick our functional and structural naming all together into our wonderful little thing again, you'd notice that our uni and bipolar stick around in the afferent or sensory subdivision, with the multi being in both the central nervous system, aka your inter or association neurons, and your efferent neurons hanging out in your motor division. Now, we've discussed the excitable stuff, but let's talk about the neuroglia, the support cells. The neurons aren't going to function without these guys. I'm just going to go ahead and say that right here, right now. They aren't electrically excitable, but by golly, they help out a lot in their own happy little ways. The central nervous system has 4, the peripheral nervous system has 2. Here is our 4 right here: oligodendrocytes, the microglial cells, the fibrous or the protoplasmic astrocytes, as well as your ependymal cell. Let's go ahead and just look at these one by one. Beginning with your ependymal cell. It's the thing that lines your brain, it lines your spinal cord. It basically looks like an epithelial tissue. It's the one that also helps with the blood-brain barrier, meaning that blood will never, ever, 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 ever see nervous tissue. It only interact with these supporter cells. They will never be. It's kind of like the paparazzi and your actor friends. All the bodyguards are going to go ahead and guard against the paparazzi, so your very famous and wonderful neurons don't have a chance of interacting with those crazy, crazy fans. Now, something else about the ependymal cells is it also creates the cerebrospinal fluid. It's the stuff that helps support your brain and gives it the nutrients that it needs. And when you do a spinal tap, it's the stuff that you're pulling out of the spinal cord to see what's going on. Now, the astrocytes have a huge role in the blood-brain barrier as well, but it also is the most abundant cell in your nervous system. It is even more abundant than that of a neuron. Now, it has a whole bunch of roles. It has the nutrient and ion balance if you look nice and closely at this wonderful little picture, you got these astrocytes hanging out by the capillary and making branches to the ependymal cells. It's making branches to the neuron cell body. It literally does the nutrient exchange, ion exchange, and it's there to help out if something gets damaged. Now, FYI, astrocytoma, it is the most common form of brain tumor. Considering what we just discussed, is that really surprising? I mean, really, it replicates the most. It's the direct line to blood, so you're going to see if there's blood in the toxins in the blood, it'll take care of it. If there's waste, excess waste materials and things like that, it takes care of it. And the extracellular fluid is going to take care of that too. So it has to deal with a lot of stresses. And the more stresses and the more replication you see inside a cell, the more likely it is going to be cancerous or form a tumor. So let's move on to the next good boy, the microglial cell. The microglial cell is your macrophage, we're going to call it, your white blood cell, your defensor, your security guard. He's the one that's going to clear out all the baddies. And you'll notice that a lot of these neurons, they don't really touch each other. They're just sitting there going, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you with one another. Well, they have to communicate via signals in between each other, and these microglial cells clean out that excess signal molecule. Finally, we are talking oligodendrocytes. This is the insulation to your neuron. This is the guy that's making the really nice sweaters for your neurons that you wonder, I wonder how he makes it. This is it. Get in contact with the oligodendrocyte. Now, why on earth would you need axons to have insulation? Yeah, we're not doing that. It's the same as wiring. If you have plastic coating for wiring, it gives it a really strong signal. It's not interrupted. It keeps it strong and makes it quick. If it's bare and naked, it takes a very long time. It takes much longer than it does without insulation. Same thing with your neuron. If you don't have insulation on the neuron, which happens a lot, actually, surprisingly, especially with chronic pain, the signal is going to be slow and dull. Now, we talked about the central nervous system, neuroglia. Let's talk peripheral nervous system. You really just got two. You got a Schwann cell and you got a satellite cell. Where's my cursor? There it is. The Schwann cell is hanging out around the wonderful little axon, and the satellite cell is hanging out around your neural body. It's sort of the way of trying to hide from her adoring fans out in the wild blue yonder. It's pretty much just support cells / making insulation. You'll notice that this one right here, the Schwann cell, has created the myelination or the plastic coating. Well, this one isn't doing so hot. The satellite cell is covering this one. It's trying to cover it up, make certain that no debris or stuff can get to it. It's the selective goodness. So myelination, I've failed to mention in the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Myelination is your plastic covering for your axon. It is the thing that gives it that insulation. Now, here it is in all its beauty. Here, that nice thick brown part. With this cross section here, you're not going to see any myelination, or in a more technical term, unmyelinated. Now, what's the difference between a oligodendrocyte and a Schwann cell? Well, let's take a look-see. Oligodendrocyte, central nervous system only. Schwann cell, peripheral nervous system only. The oligodendrocyte can make multiple wraps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's very multitasking. But this one right here, the Schwann cell, is just one per wrap. And there's the nucleus right there. It ends right there. And then you have, but it can cover multiple neurons if need be, but if it does that, it becomes unmyelinated. Finally, this wrapping, this myelination explains very nicely your white matter and your gray matter. White matter, well, that is your myelinated axons. The gray matter is the exposed neural bodies. So if I can go ahead and just switch that out right there. Neural bodies, gray, matter, axons, shiny white, plastic coating, matter. With that, this is a good point to pause and take a break. We'll be talking about the action potentials next.